Hello, I'm Michael Healy, and recently I watched the first 3 episodes of Amazon's new Rings of Power series. And I've always been a Tolkien fan, and I've delved very deeply into Tolkien's books. I'm the kind of fan who doesn't just read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but delves into the prologue to The Fellowship, the appendices to Return of the King, the Silmarillion. In fact, the Silmarillion I've probably read 10 or 12 times at least. Sometimes I think I've probably lived more in Tolkien's world than in this one. And I have some thoughts about the Amazon Lord of the Rings series, and it's probably not what some people are expecting. Some people are probably going to be disappointed to hear what I have to say. Because what I've noticed is that many of the critics of the Amazon series are really just advertising their own ignorance. They don't know Tolkien's Middle-earth as well as they think they do. That would be the charitable interpretation. The uncharitable interpretation would be that they're deliberately lying, but I don't want to go there. I'm going to assume that they're well-meaning but ignorant. First of all, one legitimate criticism would be that they reduce the time scale of the Second Age of Middle-earth quite a bit. That they collapse what would have taken centuries in Tolkien's works into a much shorter time frame. But they acknowledged this in advance, before the series ever even got started. And so I was expecting this, and I wasn't much concerned. But basically, they're squeezing what is, in Tolkien's original form, would have taken place over a period of 2,000 or 3,000 years, and they're squeezing it into probably, I would say, 50 to 100 years. Into roughly the lifespan of a Númenórean. Well, not even the whole lifespan of a long-lived Númenórean, but maybe half the lifespan of a long-lived Númenórean. So I would guess, like I said, 50 to 100 years, maybe even a little less. But I'm not concerned about that because they told us all along they were going to do that. And I can see a certain rationale for it. It would be difficult to have the human characters dying off every episode or two, which is pretty much what you'd have to do. Furthermore, how can you really squeeze 2,000 or 3,000 years into 40 hours of television? It's a little ridiculous to do something like that. It makes more sense to do what they did and reduce the time frame. Another legitimate criticism would be early on, at the end of the first episode, when Galadriel jumps off the ship, seemingly intending to swim the Great Sea. Even an elf would not be able to swim across the ocean. That would be a little much. Elves are undying in the sense that old age won't kill them, but they still have their limitations. They can drown. They can become exhausted, and after a few days of swimming, probably it would be too much. But there is a way that perhaps this could be believable. And that would be if Galadriel's plan was not to swim across the whole ocean, but only to swim a little further north and get on shore, on the Valinorian shore, dry yourself off, and then cross the Arctic sea ice from Valinor to Middle-earth. This would be more plausible because she's done it before. The Silmarillion makes that clear. The fire of their hearts was young and led by Fingolfin and his sons, and by Finrod and Galadriel they dared to pass into the bitterest north, and finding no other way, they endured at last the terror of the Helcaraxa and the cruel hills of ice. So that would be a possibility. Also, Tolkien mentions that in the northern parts of Middle-earth, Valinor and Middle-earth are closer together than they are further south. One final legitimate criticism is that at the very beginning in the battle with the troll, it is a little, at first glance, a little ridiculous that Galadriel's soldiers seem to be so useless until she shows up and slays the troll. But even there could be a rationale for it. And that would be that they got taken by surprise. The troll ambushed them. They were not prepared to fight. And any army could perform poorly under those circumstances. A good army, well-trained, well-drilled, sometimes might be able to recover from an ambush situation and come back to win. It's been done. But not necessarily. It all depends on the situation. I mean, there's many contingencies in warfare that we can't necessarily predict. And sometimes even a good army may be defeated when it is ambushed. Galadriel, on the other hand, had a little bit of time to prepare, figure out what she was going to do, because she heard the troll attacking her men and knew that something was going on. Now, a large number of the critics focus on also just the fact of Galadriel being a warrior, as if that's a huge departure from Tolkien. For one thing, there's the passage I already read that noted that Galadriel was one of the leaders along with her brother Finrod and Fingolfin and his sons. But then there's also this passage in the Silmarillion. These passages are both in the 9th chapter. There's also this passage. Finrod was with Turgon, his friend, but Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor, to stand that day tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oath she swore, but the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide, unguarded lands and to rule there a realm at her own will. And so we see here that when in her younger days, Galadriel could be described, and Tolkien does describe her as being valiant. This is significant because while Tolkien does not say in this passage that she was a warrior, nonetheless, the word valiant is usually used to refer to a brave warrior, and it raises the question of whether Galadriel was, in fact, a warrior, which means what they're doing is a reasonable extrapolation from what Tolkien said. And then there's also this, in Appendix B to the Return of the King. They took Dol Guldur, and Galadriel threw down its walls and laid bare its pits, and the forest was cleansed. In other words, when the elves of Lothlorien, at the end of the Third Age, defeat Sauron's lieutenant in Dol Guldur, it is Galadriel that destroys the fortress. Tolkien specifically mentions Galadriel doing this. That's also something you would expect a warrior to do. So it's not such a stretch, really, for Galadriel to be a warrior. And then the final criticism I want to comment on is the one that shows the most ignorance of Tolkien lore on the part of the critics, as far as I can tell, and that is the claim that it's somehow a problem for the Harfoots to be darker skinned, that it's somehow a problem for the Harfoots to be on a lower level of material civilization compared to the hobbits of the Third Age. These claims are pretty ridiculous, extremely ridiculous, when you actually read the prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring. I've even seen this claim that the hobbits didn't exist before the Third Age. Which again, all of these claims are contradicted in Tolkien's own words. Listen to this passage, for example. The beginning of hobbits lies far back in the elder days that are now lost and forgotten. Only the elves still preserve any records of that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men seldom appear, and hobbits are not mentioned at all. Yet it is clear that hobbits had, in fact, lived quietly in Middle-earth for many long years before other folk became even aware of them. In other words, Tolkien's saying that the hobbits already existed at the time that the Silmarillion took place. That's what he means when he speaks of the Elder Days. Hobbits already existed in the First Age, and so they certainly existed in the Second Age, but they were hidden. They were very careful to hide themselves. And then as to the Harfoots being dark-skinned, or at least some of them, Tolkien has this to say. Before the crossing of the mountains, the hobbits had already become divided into three somewhat different breeds: Harfoots, Stoors, and Falahides. The Harfoots were browner of skin, smaller and shorter. It's right there. Tolkien says, Harfoots, brown skin. As for the claim that the hobbits didn't exist before the Third Age, the real story there is that that's when they settled the Shire. About this time, legend among the hobbits first becomes history with a reckoning of years, for it was in the 1601st year of the Third Age that the Falahide brothers, Marco and Blanco, set out from Bree, and having obtained permission from the High King at Fornost, they crossed the Brown River Branduin with a great following of hobbits. All right, so that's when the Shire is first settled. It's not when hobbits come into existence, people. Furthermore, there's another twist to all this, which disproves some fools on the left. Not all fools are right-wing, but there are fools on the left who say that Tolkien's a racist. But that can easily be refuted from this passage and others like it. And so Gollum found them hours later, when he returned, crawling and creeping down the path out of the gloom ahead. Sam sat propped against the stone, his head dropping sideways and his breathing heavy. In his lap lay Frodo's head, drowned deep in sleep. Upon his white forehead lay one of Sam's brown hands, and the other lay softly upon his master's breast. Peace was in both their faces. Now you may ask, how do we know that this is an indication of Sam naturally being dark-skinned? He was the gardener, maybe he just had a suntan. Well, here's the answer. That was in chapter 8 of The Two Towers, The Stairs of Cirith Ungol. In chapter 4 of The Two Towers, of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, Tolkien has this to say about a fallen soldier from Harad. His brown hand still clutched the hilt of a broken sword. Now, the Haradrim seem to be clearly based on Indian or Middle Eastern or North African peoples. They use war elephants, and those are the cultures that historically used war elephants. And so the parallelism between them being described as brown-skinned and Sam being described as brown-skinned indicates that Sam Gamgee, one of the greatest heroes of The Lord of the Rings, is dark-skinned. Furthermore, it is not true that the light-skinned people are always good guys in Tolkien's writings, not in the least. Because in the Second Age, and this is a bit of a spoiler for people who don't know what's going to happen in the Amazon series, but Tolkien makes it clear that large numbers of Númenóreans, the majority in fact, ended up getting corrupted and turning to evil. Now the Númenóreans are the descendants of the men who sided with the elves during the First Age, and those men were all white-skinned. That's very clear in the Silmarillion. So, as a matter of fact, one of the greatest of Tolkien's heroes is dark-skinned, and there are a great number of light-skinned villains. Great numbers of light-skinned villains. So I defy the claim that Tolkien's racist, which some people on the left have made, and I defy the claim that the Amazon series does not understand Tolkien's works. In fact, the showrunners of the Amazon series seem to know Tolkien's works more deeply and intimately than some of the critics. I don't know if they're going to continue going on this trajectory. Maybe they'll ruin it eventually. I don't know. I've only seen 3 episodes. That's all that's been released. But based on what I've seen, I'm optimistic. All right, so those are my comments and criticisms. Have a good day.